I'm planning to write a 40-minute voiceover script about a samurai's day, aiming for around 6,000 words of continuous narrative prose with an engaging opening and satisfying conclusion. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a samurai. What do you see? A man in dark armor, a curved blade flashing in the light. A duel at dawn, two warriors circling each other in the mist. Blood on the snow, the clash of steel. That is the image most of us carry. It comes from movies, from paintings, from stories passed down and polished until they shine. But it is mostly a fantasy. The real samurai spent very little of his life in battle. Most days, he never drew his sword at all. So what did he actually do? How did he fill the hours from the moment he woke to the moment he slept? The answer is stranger and richer than the legend. A samurai was a soldier, yes, but he was also something else. He was a clerk, a poet, a student, a father, a servant, a man bound by rules so tight they governed how he sat, how he ate, how he spoke, and how he died. To understand him, we have to follow him through a single ordinary day. Not a day of war, a day of peace. Because peace, not war, was where the samurai spent nearly all of his time. Let us begin in darkness. It is long before dawn. The village is silent. The sky is black, with maybe a thin gray line at the edge of the mountains. Most people are still deep in sleep. But in one house, a man is already awake. He did not wake because a rooster crowed or because sunlight touched his face. He woke because he trained himself to wake. Rising early was not a habit for the samurai. It was a discipline. It was part of who he was. He sleeps on a thin mat on the floor, a futon rolled out over woven tatami. There is no soft mattress, no pile of pillows. The room is nearly empty. A samurai's home was famous for its bareness. Clean lines, bare wood. A single scroll hanging on the wall perhaps, and a simple flower arrangement. Nothing wasted, nothing extra. This emptiness was not poverty. Many samurai could have filled their homes with treasures. The emptiness was a choice. It reflected a mind that valued clarity over clutter, order over excess. Even the space a man lived in was meant to shape the way he thought. He rises quietly. He folds his bedding and puts it away. Nothing is left lying around. Then, before anything else, before food, before words, before the tasks of the day, he sits. And he does nothing. This is meditation. To the modern eye, it might look like resting, or dozing, or simply staring into space. But it was one of the most important things a samurai did. Many samurai followed Zen Buddhism, and Zen placed enormous weight on stillness, on sitting, on breathing, on emptying the mind of noise. For a man whose profession was violence, this might seem like a contradiction, but it was the opposite. The whole point was control. Think about what a warrior faces: fear, panic, anger, the racing heart before danger, the flood of thoughts that make hands shake and judgment fail. A samurai could not afford any of that. In the middle of a fight, hesitation meant death. A cluttered, frightened mind meant death. So he trained his mind the way he trained his body. He sat in the cold dark of morning and learned to be calm when there was no reason to be calm, so that later, when there was every reason to panic, he could stay calm anyway. Zen taught the idea of a mind like still water. Water that is disturbed cannot reflect anything clearly, but water that is perfectly still becomes a mirror. It shows the world exactly as it is. The samurai wanted a mind like that, a mind that would not be thrown into chaos by fear or surprise, a mind that could see a threat coming and respond without thinking, without freezing, without doubt. So he began each day by sitting in the dark, breathing slowly, letting his thoughts settle like dust in a quiet room. There was another idea woven into all of this, the acceptance of death. This sounds grim, and in a way it was. But to the samurai, it was freeing. One of the most famous samurai texts says that the way of the warrior is found in death. What it meant was this: A man who is terrified of dying will hesitate. He will cling to life so hard that he cannot act. But a man who has already accepted that he will die, who has made peace with it, is free. He can act without fear, because the thing he fears most has already been faced and accepted in his own mind. So in his morning stillness, the samurai often reflected on his own death, not to be morbid, to be free. When the meditation is done, he turns to another ritual, his weapons. And here we come to something the movies get half right and half wrong. Yes, the sword mattered enormously, but the samurai did not just grab his blade and swing it around. He cared for it the way a monk cares for a sacred object. The sword, especially the long curved katana, was the soul of the samurai. That was not just a poetic phrase, it was a belief taken seriously. The blade was passed down through families, it was given names, it was treated as a living thing with a spirit of its own. And it demanded care. Steel rusts, a blade left alone will corrode and dull and eventually be ruined. So the samurai maintained his sword with patience and respect. Watch him work. He draws the blade from its scabbard slowly, carefully, always aware of the edge. He examines the steel in the dim light, looking for spots, for dullness, for any sign of damage. He uses a soft cloth to wipe away the old oil. He taps a small ball of fine powder along the blade, a powder made from polishing stone, and wipes it clean, lifting away dirt and moisture. Then he applies a thin new coat of oil, a special clove oil, spreading it evenly to protect the metal. Every movement is deliberate. There is nothing careless about it. This was not a chore he rushed through. It was a form of meditation in itself. Man and blade, together, in the quiet before dawn. Why such devotion to a tool? Because it was not just a tool. The sword was the visible sign of who he was. Only samurai were allowed to carry two swords, the long one and a shorter companion blade. Ordinary people could not. So the swords marked his rank, his identity, his right to exist as a member of the warrior class. To neglect his sword was to neglect his honor. To care for it was to care for himself, for his family name, for everything he was supposed to be. By now, perhaps, a faint light is creeping over the mountains. The day is beginning, and it is time to eat. But even breakfast was simple. The samurai's food was plain, especially compared to what we might expect for a warrior of high status. The center of it was rice. White rice was prized, though many ate a coarser brown rice or rice mixed with other grains. Alongside the rice, there might be miso soup, a warm broth made from fermented soybean paste. Some pickled vegetables, maybe a little fish. That was often the whole meal. No feast, no mountains of meat. In fact, for much of this history, eating the meat of four-legged animals was frowned upon, partly for religious reasons tied to Buddhism. Fish was acceptable. Beef and pork were not, for most people, most of the time. The samurai ate with the same discipline he brought to everything. He did not gorge himself. He did not waste food. Overeating dulled the body and the mind, and a samurai wanted both sharp. There was a common wisdom about eating until you were only most of the way full, never completely stuffed. Restraint at the table was just another form of the self-control that ran through his entire life. Even in something as basic as filling his stomach, he practiced discipline. And here we should pause to correct a big misunderstanding. When we imagine a samurai's day, we imagine action, fighting, training with weapons from morning to night. But the truth is that for long stretches of this history, Japan was at peace. There was a period of more than 200 years under the rule of a single, powerful family when the country had almost no major wars at all. Generations of samurai were born, lived their whole lives, and died without ever fighting in a real battle. Think about that. The warrior class in an age with no war. So what did these warriors do all day for 2 centuries, if not fight? This is the heart of our story, because the answer reveals who the samurai really was. After breakfast comes training. And yes, part of it was martial. The samurai practiced with the sword. going through forms, repeating the same cuts and stances over and over until they became automatic. He practiced with the bow, for archery was one of the oldest and most respected skills of the warrior, older even than the sword in its prestige. He trained on horseback. He practiced with the spear and other weapons. He might spar with fellow samurai, testing his timing and reflexes. This physical training was real and demanding. A warrior had to keep his body ready, even in peacetime, even when the enemy never came. But here is where the legend breaks open, and something surprising steps out. The samurai's training was not only physical, it was also deeply, seriously intellectual and artistic. And this was not a hobby squeezed in around the edges. It was considered essential to being a complete warrior. There was an ideal at the center of samurai culture. In Japanese, it is often described as the balance of the pin and the sword, or the way of the brush and the sword together. The idea was that a true samurai must master both. Not one or the other, both. A man who could fight but could not write, who could kill but could not compose a poem, who was strong in the body but empty in the mind, was seen as incomplete. Half a man. A brute. The whole warrior was expected to be a scholar as much as a soldier. So let us follow him into these other arts, because this is where we truly meet him. Start with calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing. The samurai would sit at a low table with paper, an inkstone, a stick of solid ink, and a brush. He would pour a little water onto the stone and grind the ink stick against it, slowly, mixing the black liquid. This grinding alone was a moment of calm and focus. Then he would take up the brush and write characters, poems, sayings, passages from texts he admired. Why did a warrior need beautiful handwriting? For several reasons. First, it was practical. A samurai of any rank had to read and write, because his duties often involved documents and correspondence. But it went far beyond the practical. Calligraphy was seen as a window into the soul. The way a man held his brush, the confidence or hesitation in his strokes, the balance of a character on the page, all of it was thought to reveal his inner state. A shaky, uncertain hand suggested a shaky, uncertain mind. Bold, clean, controlled strokes suggested a bold, clean, controlled spirit. And notice how this connects to swordsmanship. Both required total focus. Both required a steady hand and a calm mind. Both were done in a single, flowing motion that could not be undone. Once the brush touches the paper, the ink is committed. Just as once the sword begins its cut, it cannot be recalled. The samurai practiced calligraphy not in spite of being a warrior, but because it made him a better one. Then there was poetry. This may be the hardest thing for us to picture. A hardened warrior, a man trained to kill, sitting quietly and composing delicate verses about the moon, about falling cherry blossoms, about the sadness of autumn, or the loneliness of a traveler. And yet this was completely normal. Poetry was woven into the life of the educated classes, and the samurai were expected to take part. They composed short poems for special occasions. They exchanged verses with friends. Some even composed a final poem in the face of death, a farewell captured in a few careful lines. Why poetry? Because it sharpened the mind and refined the feelings. It taught a man to observe the world closely, to notice the small details, the change of seasons, the play of light, the passing of time. It taught economy, saying much with little, which is its own kind of discipline. And it connected the samurai to a long tradition of culture and beauty that raised him above mere violence. A man who could feel the beauty of a single falling leaf and capture it in words was a man of depth. And depth was part of the ideal. The changing of the seasons held special meaning. Japanese culture placed enormous value on the awareness that all things pass. The cherry blossom was the perfect symbol of this. It is stunningly beautiful, and it lasts only a few days before the petals fall. The samurai saw himself in that blossom. A life that could be brilliant and brief. Beauty that does not last. This awareness of impermanence, of the fleeting nature of everything, ran through his poetry, his art, and his whole way of seeing the world. It made beauty more precious, not less, because it could not be held onto. And then there was the tea ceremony. This is perhaps the most surprising of all the samurai arts, and the most revealing. Imagine again this warrior, capable of terrible violence, kneeling in a tiny, quiet room, carefully preparing a bowl of green tea for a guest, following a set of precise, graceful movements that have been refined over generations. It sounds almost absurd. What could this delicate ritual have to do with a man of war? Everything, as it turns out. The tea ceremony was not really about the tea. It was about presence, about being completely absorbed in the moment, about performing simple actions with total attention and grace. The host prepared the room, arranged a scroll and a flower, heated the water, measured the powdered green tea, whisked it, and presented it. All in a set sequence of movements, each one deliberate, each one mindful. Guests entered through a low doorway that forced even the proud to bow their heads, and, symbolically, to leave their status and their weapons behind. Inside, in that small, still space, distinctions of rank softened. There was only the shared moment. The samurai valued this because it was, once again, a training of the mind. It demanded the same qualities as combat, though it looked like the opposite. Total focus, calm, awareness of every detail, economy of movement, no gesture wasted. The ability to be fully present, right now, in this single action, without the mind wandering to the past or future. A warrior who could achieve that state over a bowl of tea could carry the same clear presence into a moment of danger. The tea room and the battlefield, strange as it sounds, taught the same lesson. Be here. Be calm. Be complete in what you do. Do you see the pattern now? Meditation, sword care, calligraphy, poetry, tea. On the surface, these are wildly different activities, but underneath, they are all the same. They are all practices of discipline, focus, and self-control. They all aim at the same inner state, a quiet mind, a steady hand, full presence in the moment, acceptance of what comes. The samurai did not separate the warrior from the artist. To him, they were one and the same. The same qualities that made a great swordsman made a great calligrapher, a great poet, a great host at tea. And the pursuit of all of them together made a great human being. That was the goal. Now the morning gives way to the working part of the day, and here we meet the side of the samurai that almost no one imagines. Because for most samurai, during those long centuries of peace, the main business of life was not war. It was administration, government, paperwork, duty to a lord. To understand this, we need to understand the samurai's place in society. He did not simply wander around being a warrior on his own. He belonged to a lord, a powerful local ruler who controlled land and people. The samurai served this lord. That was the core of his existence. In exchange for his loyalty and service, he received a stipend, usually measured in rice, which supported him and his family. He was, in a sense, a professional retainer. His life was defined by his relationship to the man he served. This loyalty was not casual. It was the deepest bond in the samurai's world. He was expected to serve his lord faithfully, to obey, to put his lord's interests above his own comfort, and even above his own life. If his lord went to war, he fought. If his lord needed a task done, he did it. His identity was tied to that service. A samurai without a lord was a masterless drifter, a figure often viewed with suspicion, a man who had lost his place in the order of things. But when there was no war, what did this service actually look like? It looked a lot like the work of a government official, a clerk, a manager, a bureaucrat with a sword at his side. Picture the samurai arriving at his lord's castle or at the administrative offices. He is not there to fight, he is there to work. And the work was the ordinary machinery of running a domain. Someone had to collect the taxes, which came largely in rice from the farmers. Someone had to record how much came in and where it went. Someone had to manage the storehouses. Someone had to oversee construction projects, roads, buildings, water systems. Someone had to settle disputes between people. Someone had to enforce the law and keep order. Someone had to handle correspondence between the lord and other lords and with the central government. Someone had to manage the lord's household, his finances, his supplies, his ceremonies. All of this was done by samurai. So a samurai might spend his day doing accounts, checking figures, making sure the numbers balanced. He might spend it writing reports and letters, which is exactly why calligraphy and literacy mattered so much. He might spend it inspecting a project, or attending a meeting, or listening to a complaint and deciding what to do about it. He might serve as a kind of policeman, or a judge, or a tax officer, or a supply manager, or a secretary. Higher-ranking samurai took on greater responsibilities, advising the lord, helping to govern the whole domain, managing large groups of people. Lower-ranking samurai handled the smaller, everyday tasks. But across all these levels, the reality was the same. The warrior class became, in a time of peace, the governing class. The people who ran the country day to day were samurai sitting at desks, not on horses. There's something almost ironic in this. A class defined by war spent most of its history keeping the peace, not through fighting, but through the patient, unglamorous work of administration. The sword hung at the samurai's side as a symbol of what he was and what he could do. But the brush and the ledger were the tools he actually used, day after day, year after year. The two swords marked his status. The paperwork filled his hours. And this is why that ideal of the pen and the sword was so important and so practical. A samurai who could only fight was nearly useless in a time of peace. What a lord needed was men who could think, read, write, calculate, organize, and govern. Men who could keep the domain running smoothly. So the education of a samurai was not just training for war, it was training for governance. It was training to be a capable, literate, disciplined administrator who could also, if the day ever came, take up arms. The scholar and the soldier lived in the same body because the job required both. This does not mean the martial side ever fully disappeared. The training with weapons continued, generation after generation, even when no war came. The readiness had to be maintained. A samurai still had to be prepared to fight, to defend his lord, to answer a call to arms that might never come, but might come tomorrow. And there was always the possibility of violence in ordinary life. A samurai's honor could be challenged. Duels did happen. Conflicts could turn deadly. The blade was not just decoration, but the daily reality for most samurai in the long age of peace was work and duty, not combat. The warrior spent his days as a servant of the state. Let us think for a moment about what governed all of this. Because behind the meditation, the arts, the service, and the readiness for war, there was a code, a set of principles that told a samurai how to live. We often call it the way of the warrior. It was less a written rule book and more a set of ideals absorbed from childhood, taught through example, through stories, through the expectations of family and society. At the center of this code were certain virtues prized above all others. Loyalty, first of all. Faithfulness to one's lord, unwavering and total. Courage, the willingness to face danger and death without flinching. Honor, a deep concern for one's reputation and one's integrity. A refusal to act in a shameful way. Honesty and sincerity, meaning that a samurai's word was his bond, and he did not lie or break promises. Politeness and respect, a genuine courtesy toward others, not as weakness, but as a sign of a controlled and considerate spirit. Self-control, the mastery over one's own emotions and impulses. And a sense of duty and justice, a clear feeling for what was right and an obligation to do it. Honor deserves special attention because it was so powerful in the samurai's world. To live with honor was everything. To lose it was worse than death. A samurai who was shamed, who failed in his duty, who acted in a cowardly or dishonorable way, carried a stain that could not easily be washed away. This concern for honor could be beautiful, driving men to acts of great integrity and self-sacrifice. It could also be harsh and unforgiving, driving men to extreme acts to preserve or restore their name. The famous, terrible ritual of taking one's own life in a very specific and painful way was tied to this. It was a way to die with honor, to accept responsibility, to show courage in the face of death, and to preserve the family name even in disgrace. It is a grim part of the story, and we should not romanticize it. But it shows how absolute the demand for honor could be. Now, we should be honest about this code too. Much of the polished, idealized version of the warrior's way that we know today was shaped and written down later, sometimes long after the great age of the samurai, and even more so after their time had ended. Real samurai were human beings. They were not all noble and pure. Some were greedy, some were cruel, some were cowardly. Some betrayed their lords, some broke the rules. The code was an ideal, and like all ideals, it was often not fully lived up to, but it was a real force in their lives. It shaped how they were supposed to behave, how they judged themselves and each other, and how they made sense of a life balanced between violence and peace, between the sword and the brush. Even when they failed it, it was there, pulling at them, defining what a good samurai was supposed to be. Now let us return to our single day, because the working hours are ending and evening is coming on. The samurai finishes his duties, leaves the offices or the castle, and returns home. The light is softening, the day's tasks are done, and now we see yet another side of him. Not the warrior, not the artist, not the official, the family man, the ordinary person at home. Because a samurai was, after all, a person with a household. Many were married, many had children, and the home had its own order, its own duties, its own quiet rhythms. The samurai's wife played a crucial role in this. While he was away serving his lord, she managed the household. And this was no small thing. She controlled the family finances, often on a tight budget because samurai stipends were not always generous. And many samurai families were far from rich. She ran the home, oversaw the servants if they had any, raised the children, and maintained the family's honor and reputation in daily life. In many ways, she was the manager of the household enterprise, and a samurai's home could not function without her. The children, meanwhile, were being shaped from an early age into the next generation. A samurai's son was raised to become a samurai. From childhood, he learned the values of the warrior class. He was taught discipline, respect, endurance. He learned to read and write. He began his training in the martial arts. He was told the stories of great warriors and taught what honor meant and what shame meant. The upbringing could be strict, even harsh by modern standards, because it was meant to produce a person who could bear the demands of the samurai life. Daughters, too, were raised with the values of their class, prepared to manage households of their own, and, in some cases, even trained in the use of certain weapons to defend the home if needed. The evening meal, like breakfast, was usually simple: rice, soup, vegetables, perhaps some fish. The family might gather to eat, following the customs of respect and order that governed even mealtimes. Manners mattered. How one sat, how one ate, how one behaved toward elders and superiors. All of it reflected the discipline and courtesy at the heart of the code. Even at home, even in relaxation, the samurai was expected to embody the values he lived by. There was no clean line between the public warrior and the private man. The code followed him through the front door and sat with him at his own table, and yet the evening also had its softer moments. This is easy to forget when we think only of the fierce warrior. But the samurai was a human being with a human life. He might spend the evening with his family. He might read, for reading was valued and books were treasured. He might practice his calligraphy again, or work on a poem, or simply enjoy a quiet conversation. He might look at the moon, or the garden, or the changing light of the season, with that trained awareness of beauty and impermanence. The same man who studied the way of death also appreciated a quiet evening at home. That was not a contradiction. It was the fullness of a life that held both the sword and the flower, both duty and tenderness. As night deepens, the samurai prepares for sleep. The day is ending as it began, in quiet and order. He may reflect on the day, on whether he lived up to what he should be, Tomorrow he will rise again before dawn, and it will begin all over. The meditation, the care of the sword, the simple meal, the training of body and mind, the service to his Lord, the return home. The rhythm of a life shaped by discipline in every hour. So let us step back now and look at the whole picture we have drawn, because it is very different from the one we started with. We began by imagining the samurai as a man of endless battle, a sword-swinging warrior living from fight to fight. And we have found something far more interesting and far more human. The samurai was a warrior, yes. He trained for war, he lived by a warrior's code, and he was ready to fight and die when called. But that was only one part of him. For most of his life, in most of his days, he was something else entirely. He was a student of the arts, practicing calligraphy and poetry and the way of tea. He was a man of quiet discipline, beginning each day in stillness and meditation. He was, above all, during those long centuries of peace, an administrator, a clerk, an official, a servant of his lord, running the ordinary machinery of government with a brush and a ledger far more often than with a blade. And he was a family man, a husband and a father, embedded in a household with its own duties and its own gentler joys. The great truth of the samurai is that he was two things at once, and he saw no conflict in it. He was a warrior and a scholar, a soldier and a civil servant, a man of the sword and a man of the pen. The ideal he aimed for was not to be only fierce, but to be complete, to master violence and to transcend it, to hold power and to control it, to be capable of death and to live with grace. All those practices that seem so different, the meditation and the swordplay, the poetry and the paperwork, the tea ceremony and the training in arms, they were all threads of a single fabric. They all wove toward the same person, a disciplined, focused, dutiful, cultured human being who could serve, who could create, who could govern, and who could fight if he had to. That is why the real samurai is more impressive than the legend, not less. The man who only fights is easy to imagine, and, in truth, a little shallow. The man who can fight and also write beautifully, who can face death calmly and also weep at the falling of the cherry blossoms, who can command on the battlefield and also balance the accounts of a domain, who can be deadly and also gentle, that man is far harder to be. And that is who the samurai, at his best, tried to become. So the next time you picture a samurai, do not stop at the flashing blade and the duel in the mist. Picture him also in the dark before dawn, sitting perfectly still, breathing slowly, mastering his own mind. Picture him bent over paper, grinding ink, drawing a single, careful character. Picture him kneeling in a small, quiet room, preparing tea for a guest with total attention. Picture him at a desk, checking figures, writing reports, keeping a peaceful land running smoothly year after year. Picture him at home in the evening, a husband and a father, watching the moon rise over his garden. And then picture the sword, resting at his side, cared for like a sacred thing, a symbol of everything he was and everything he was ready to do. Because that was the real life of a samurai. Not one endless battle, but a life of discipline, learning, duty, and quiet strength, lived one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. A warrior and a scholar, a servant and a master of himself. That balance, held through a lifetime of dawns, is the true legacy the samurai left behind. And perhaps that is something worth carrying with us, long after the swords have been put away.